Welcome to the first edition of Ask Alex. Could you introduce yourself to your favorable crowd right now?
Sure. My name is Alex Hamani. I've been a pioneer in the single-family rental space for about 16, 17 years now, way before the recession. Been buying and selling homes since then. We're in the fix and flip business, we're in the rental business. Now we moved on to the commercial business. So, all over the map, basically.
Awesome, awesome. So today's edition of Ask Alex, we're going to talk about single-family rentals or residences versus multifamily rentals, right?
Okay.
So why should you invest in multifamily residences? Let's start there.
So, first of all, there's two different categories, right? One is the single family and one is the multifamily, and why invest in each one of them, okay? Multifamily, when you trade on a multifamily, it's solely based on a cap rate. So what's happening is you're selling the asset not based on the value of the asset of what it's appreciating to, but what it's trading at as a cap rate, right? What the net operating income is and what the cap rate is. On a single family, you can trade it at a cap rate, but also the single family asset, as it appreciates, your buyer on the other hand is Mr. and Mrs. Smith, who's looking to buy a house for themselves. So therefore, your delta in the appreciation is higher on the single family. On the multifamily, it's solely based on a cap rate, so operating cash flow.
Okay. So what's the average cost of a property in the multifamily area? We're just going to stay with multifamily for right now.
So it depends on what part of the country you're in and what the multifamily is trading at. We are in Dallas-Fort Worth, which is one of the hottest real estate markets in the country, right? So you've got, 300 some people moving in every day. The population growth is off the chain. If you look at the whole MSA of DFW, you're at the fourth largest MSA in the country. So if you want to look at that from that perspective, and depending on what class your multifamily is in, A, B, or C, you can trade that from anywhere from a high a multifamily from 4.5 cap rate all the way to maybe 6.5 cap rate.
Okay. So what type of financing options are there for the multifamily type purchases?
So on the multifamily type purchases, there's always the Fannie Mae and the Freddie Mac, the government loans, which are trading at a very cheap rate these days. And there's also the CMBS loans, right? And your local banks. Your local banks are borrowing money at a very low rate. They're loaning money out at a very low rate. So the financing options are abundant today.
Awesome, awesome. So when you have vacancies, what kind of expenses should you anticipate for those vacancies?
So which class are you talking about?
We're still talking multifamily.
So multifamily vacancies, because of COVID, is a different scenario. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So now COVID is kind of throwing a wrench into the multifamily space, in my opinion, because a lot of your people that are out of a job right now, your waitresses, waiters, bartenders, hospitality, right? A lot of them tend to stay in those Class B, Class C apartments. So your vacancy rate may be higher, and you have an eviction moratorium going on. On the single family side, your vacancy rate is a lot lower. Your occupancy rate is a lot higher because your class of tenant is a little bit better, right? So the people that actually rent the single family homes are the people that come from the apartments. So now they've done better in life, they can afford a little bit more, or they need a little bit more space. So those are a little bit, your occupancy rate is much higher there than it is in the multifamily.
So when you do have a vacancy in the multifamily, what would you expect in terms of reserve funds? What type of reserve should you have to overcome the vacancy rate in a multifamily?
So I really don't want to get into the exact percentage of
Just
dollar
a
amounts.
ball range. Ballpark.
Again, it's geographically located, and plus with COVID on board now, the numbers have all changed,
Gotcha,
right?
gotcha.
So it's hard to, I don't want to give a ballpark for something that's still fluid right now.
Okay. And so this might be the same kind of response. What is an average time frame for them to expect a cash flow on a multifamily?
So multifamily, if you're buying from day one, you should cash flow if it's not being ground up, because you're buying it based on a cap rate.
Okay.
Right? So you're buying it on cash flow. That's the whole purpose of buying it on a cap rate. Single family, on the other hand, same scenario. If you're buying it already tenant occupied, you're buying it on a cash flow purposes. If you're building something from ground up, whether it's a single family home or a multifamily project, then you have to wait it out. So whenever the project is finished, and then you have to give some leasing time, and then you start cash flowing.
Okay. So now let's talk about the single family space. This is your space. This is where you've made your mark. You've made your name. That's your niche, right? So you should be able to tell us all kinds of wonderful nuggets on this. Why invest in a single family residence? Why?
So, you know, I've always thought the single family space is a very fluid space, right? It's liquid, right? If you have a multifamily, for example, and you want to sell it, your buyers are few and far between because your buyer is an investor on the other end, either a REIT, private equity fund, you know, high net family office, things of that nature. A single family asset, if your tenant leaves or you just want to sell it, list it on the multiple listing service, especially in a day and age today where there's an inventory crisis, it'll sell like hotcakes and you have many more buyers, and those buyers have a lot more financing options. Right? They're not going CMBS or to a bank, they're going right to a mortgage, a 30-year fixed mortgage. Mm-hmm. So therefore, the single family space, even though you can put your money into it, you can get it out really quick too. So that makes it more attractive to me than the multifamily space.
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome. Now, in terms of best areas in the DFW to purchase, what would you say to a new investor? This is the place you want to get started on your first property.
So it depends on what their exit strategy is, right? If they're going to do a buy and hold, or are they going to do a flip, or what is their timeline and their horizon, right? If their timeline horizon is 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, or are they going to hold it and create what we call generational wealth? Mm-hmm. You know, it all depends on what their exit strategy is. That's how you can determine where to buy it.
Okay. We got a great question online right now from a Paik. Paik Montgomery asked, where do you see the market going in the near future?
So Dallas-Fort Worth is just going to keep going up because there's a supply and demand. Right? Anywhere where there is more people coming in, that means inventory needs to keep up. Right? And inventory is not keeping up with the demand. Mm-hmm. So the market is only going to get higher and higher and higher prices. Now at some point it will become unaffordable. Mm-hmm. Right? And we're not there yet, but that's just a matter of time. That will happen. So in my opinion, the housing prices in the Metroplex is going to continue rising.
So how did COVID affect you in the single family space?
So surprisingly, very little. You know, and I have colleagues all around the country, right? And even them, they did not get affected much at all as far as rent collection. And I truly think it goes back to the question you asked earlier where, hey, you know, the multifamily versus the single family tenant is just a more quality tenant, mm-hmm. right, compared to that multifamily tenant. So if you look at the history and the statistics of how long someone stays in a single family house compared to a apartment building, a multifamily, it's much higher. So those individuals, those families didn't get affected by COVID as much as the multifamily. So the rent collection and occupancy percentage was just fine. I mean, there was a 2, 3, 5% dip, mm-hmm. but not compared to what the crisis was.
Okay. So I love your questions you guys are posting. There's one I'm going to ask when we get done with this conversation because it's a little off from where we are. But Shazib Ali asked a on-point question. We talked about how hot the DFW market is.
Correct.
What other markets would you suggest an investor invest in if they could go anywhere in the United States?
That's a loaded question, right? I still think, you know, the two best states or 3 best states is Florida, Texas, and Arizona. Okay. Right? Because that's where the migration is. You know, the Florida is where the Northeast is moving into, Texas is where California people are moving into, and Arizona is where California is. So I would say those 3 states.
So is there a science that you use to make those determinations, or
all
is it just
data
analytics?
Okay. All analytics. We here at the Alex Hamani companies, and any one of my companies within that, right? We don't go by our gut, we don't go by our feelings, we go by solely analytics and data, right? So where the data shows, that's what we determine where to go and what to do.
So someone interested in becoming a mogul such as yourself, they need to invest time in doing some research, it sounds like.
Oh, absolutely. Plus, you know, if you want to become, well, I wouldn't say mogul, right? That's,
That was being complimentary.
yeah, I appreciate that, but in humility, I would say that first and foremost, you know, some people call it luck, but some people call it God's blessing, right? So I'm on the latter of the two, God's blessing. You need that. As long as that has to happen first, right? So as long as that is taking place, the rest is timing, right? So when I started a single family space back in 2006, when I first bought my first rental property in Dallas-Fort Worth, when the crisis hit in 2008, I would go to banks and say, look, I want to borrow money to buy single family homes and turn them into rentals. They laughed at me. They said, you're crazy. Nobody's buying houses. The market's going to crap. It's falling, right? Why are you? I said, I have this vision that this will come back. I want to buy these houses because they're at a deep, deep discount, and I want to turn them into rentals. I must have gone through about 100 to 150 banks. I remember that. And every one of them just shut the door like you're crazy. And then 2 of them said, okay, we believe in this idea. You're right. Let's just do it. And that's how I got my start. So again, some say luck, some say God's blessing, right? So you got to have that first. Timing is everything in life, right?
Absolutely. So I'm going to ask 2 more questions. One, 2 are coming from online, and then so I'll ask a third. Let me ask my first, which is, how do you determine tenant quality and how do you minimize tenant turnover? So that's a 2-part question.
Okay, so let's first talk about the tenant turnover. In the single family space, that, ladies and gentlemen, is your biggest expense. Make no mistake, if there's anything you want to learn from this Ask Alex or whatever it is we're doing here, learn this. The turnover is your biggest expense. Because if you're in a multifamily in an apartment, you're in an 800-900 square foot apartment, 1-2 bedrooms, whatever, right? And it's cookie cutter, right? Same carpet, you go in there, you don't have to worry about the HVAC, you don't have to worry about nothing, you're just gonna go in there and slap some lipstick paint and you're done, right? House, when you turn it over, you're talking about 1,200 to 2,000 square feet. You're talking about, now I gotta check the roof, I gotta check the HVAC, I gotta check the water heater, I gotta upgrade my countertops maybe, appliances. It's a bigger living area. So your turn is your most expensive cost. So you have to minimize that. That's your number 1 priority, right? So when you're talking to that tenant to renew the lease, you have to first look at your asset and say, if this person moves out, what's it gonna cost me to fix it back up, to put it back on the market? If it's too much, then you gotta find a way to retain that. And that may be sometimes lowering their rent. People don't think, oh, I want to keep raising the rent. Well, wait a minute, what's it going to cost you when they leave? Is that worth it? So you have to strategize that, right? Now, you're in a market where rents keep going up, and you should continue going up. But at the same token, what's your cost when they vacate? If you haven't turned that house in 10 years, it's an expensive cost. If you turned it 2 years ago, then your turn cost is pretty minimal because you just did a good job on it 2 years ago, and the market rent has gone up. You can afford to spend a little bit more now, get a bit higher amount, and you're fine. So that's the question there. Now, as far as your first part of the question was the tenant quality, right? Standard procedure, right? You're going to check their credit, you're going to check their job history, right? Call their landlords. They're coming from somewhere. Call them, right? Verify their rental history. If they have an eviction on their credit report, probably not a good idea to rent to them, right? If they've been at their employment not long, not a good idea, right? And then ask for an extra security deposit. Ask for an extra month's worth of rent. See how liquid they are. Things like that, you know.
Gotcha. So we got some great questions starting to fill up in the box. But you guys, we're trying to keep our Ask Alex segment short. For those questions we don't respond to, we will send an answer online. So don't think we're missing it. It just may not be answered live. But there's one good question from an Amir. Amir said, do you recommend any portfolio lenders to refi a large group of single-family homes?
So that, is it Amir you said?
Amir.
Amir, reach out to me offline. I can introduce you to into the water of financing single-family homes within portfolios, right? So if you go back in time, if you have a multifamily property, the government through Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae and small balance loans has a program for that. The single family space came about after the 2008 crisis. So when that came about, when guys like me, when we first started, there was no financing available with local banks, right? Then Wall Street and national lenders started getting into the space, maybe 2015, 2016, and the rates started getting better. Then the US government, through Freddie Mac, decided to do a test program. That, hey, we want to also test out the single family space. So they picked 20 borrowers nationally. Only 20, and we were fortunate to be one of them. So we did a refinance with them, and they did a whole article on us on whatever their newspaper is, whatever they do. But even from then till now, the rates have even come down lower. So what's happening is, as this asset class becomes a bona fide asset class, not just some, in the wind, it's a real asset class now, and as institutional money comes into it and institutional financing, your rates are getting lower and lower and lower every day.
All right. Well, we have come to the end of our first edition of Ask Alex. Did you enjoy yourself?
I did. I've done a lot of panels before. This is the first time it was just a one-on-one. I'm in front of a camera, so it was a unique experience, sure.
Yes, sir.
And I don't mind sharing the wealth of knowledge. I mean, it's nothing that I have that is a secret, right? I don't mind sharing it because, I've been blessed, so thank God for that.
Thank you for being a part of this. Those of you online, thank you, Alex. Those of you online, please post topics that you'd like Alex to answer in the future. We're going to do this bi-weekly, so look for us in 2 weeks right here in this same space. Share it with your other friends. If they have questions, just simply send them in to Ask Alex, and we'll respond in real time. So thank you again, Alex. We're glad to have you.
Thank you so much.